It was just another quiet evening in the small town of Oak Ridge, where families were winding down, enjoying their routines after a busy day. The Smith family, like many others in the neighborhood, had gathered in their living room. The kids were finishing their homework and Sarah, the mother, was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Her husband, David, sat reading the newspaper on the couch. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost too calm, considering what was about to unfold. The family lived in a modest house near the edge of town, not far from the forested hills that framed Oak Ridge. It was a place where everyone knew each other and life moved at a slower pace. But, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, just a small vibration at first, almost unnoticeable. But then, in a matter of seconds, it grew into a deafening roar as the entire house began to shake violently. David dropped his newspaper, his eyes wide with panic. "Earthquake," he shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand as they both rushed toward their children. The walls groaned as if they were alive, and the ceiling began to crack, pieces of plaster raining down. Sarah yelled for her kids, trying to reach them through the chaos. But the shaking was relentless, and the floor felt like it was buckling beneath them. In the midst of the commotion, their dog, Max, a scruffy golden retriever mix, began barking frantically. Max had been a stray when they first found him, a dog nobody wanted. He had been wandering the streets, hungry and scared, until the Smith family took him in. His loyalty and affection had always been unquestionable, but no one had ever imagined that this seemingly ordinary dog could play a role in something so extraordinary. Max's barks cut through the noise, but it wasn't just any bark, it was different. There was a sense of urgency in his tone, as if he knew something that no one else did. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts racing. She grabbed her youngest son Eli and ushered him toward the door. "Come on, we need to get out now," she cried, the ground still shaking beneath their feet. David, with their older daughter Emily clinging to him, followed close behind. But as they reached the doorway, the ground trembled even harder, and the entire house seemed to lurch. The family's escape path was blocked. A massive piece of the ceiling fell, crashing to the floor just inches away from them, leaving them with no way out. Panic set in. David cursed under his breath as he frantically searched for another exit. But it was too late, the house had shifted too much and they were trapped. Max, who had been barking insistently, now rushed toward the back of the house. Without thinking, he darted through the kitchen and disappeared out the back door. Sarah barely noticed at first, her attention focused solely on getting her family to safety. But then she heard something strange, a distant sound of scraping, followed by a muffled bang. It was faint, but it was definitely there. David was still trying to figure out what to do when Max suddenly reappeared at the back door. The dog was covered in dirt and dust, his fur matted with debris. But he wasn't alone. There was something else with him. Max had found a way out. The family's attention turned to Max, who was now standing at the door, his eyes wide and his body rigid. His tail was tucked low, but he was pacing back and forth as if urging them to follow. David and Sarah exchanged confused glances, not sure what the dog was trying to communicate. Then, in a heartbeat, Max darted out of the door and into the yard, running toward the side of the house. Without thinking, David followed, grabbing Emily and Eli's hands as they rushed after the dog. Max led them around to the far side of the house, where the ground had buckled and created a large gap. It was a narrow opening barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. But there, in the distance, was the sound of crackling wood and the growing tremor of the earth. The family had no choice. They had to act fast. "Go, go!" David shouted, pushing his family toward the opening. The sound of the earthquake was deafening now, and the aftershocks were beginning to make the ground beneath their feet feel even more unstable. Max, who had already squeezed through the gap, was waiting on the other side, barking impatiently. Sarah hesitated, but there was no time to waste. "Go now," she urged, shoving Emily through the opening first. David followed closely behind, his heart racing. He turned to see Sarah helping Eli through the gap just as the ground shook once more, sending another wave of debris crashing toward the house. Once they were all safely outside, Max led them toward the road, his instincts guiding them through the chaos. The family, disoriented but grateful, followed the dog, who seemed to know exactly where he was going. They reached a small hill on the outskirts of the yard, where they stopped to catch their breath. The shaking had subsided slightly, but the ground still felt unstable and the aftershocks were frequent. As they looked back at the house, they saw it crumbling in on itself, the walls cracking and the roof caving in. The Smith family was just a few steps away from being trapped beneath the rubble. If Max hadn't led them to safety, they would have been caught in the collapse. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at Max. "He saved us," she whispered, her voice shaking. David, too, was visibly stunned by the turn of events. They had always loved their dog, but now, in the face of disaster, they saw him in an entirely new light. Max wasn't just a stray who found his way into their lives. He had become their hero. As the family huddled together, watching the dust settle over the wreckage of their home, they heard the distant wail of sirens. Emergency responders were beginning to arrive, but the Smith family knew that they had escaped the worst of it, thanks to Max. They had no idea how the dog had known where to lead them or why he had acted with such urgency. But they were certain of one thing: without him they might not have made it out alive. In the following days, as the town of Oakridge recovered from the devastation of the earthquake, the Smith family's story spread like wildfire. The local news picked up the story of the abandoned dog who had saved a family, and soon people were calling it a miracle. Animal shelters across the region received an outpouring of support, with many people wanting to adopt or donate to animals in need. Max's heroism became a symbol of hope in a time of tragedy. The Smiths, now homeless but deeply grateful, found temporary shelter with neighbors and friends. They had lost their home, but they hadn't lost each other, and most importantly, they hadn't lost their miracle dog. In the end, the earthquake left a trail of destruction, but it also revealed something extraordinary: the bond between humans and animals, the courage that often comes from the most unexpected places, and the simple life-changing power of a stray dog who just wanted to be loved. Max's story didn't just end with the earthquake. It became a reminder for the Smith family and the people of Oakridge that sometimes, miracles come in the most unlikely of forms. And for the Smiths, Max was no longer just a stray dog. He was their savior, their miracle, and a symbol of hope they would carry with them forever.